I'm the voice of Criminologist, your guide through the cases that keep detectives awake. Tonight, I'm walking you through 3 home invasion cold cases finally solved by perseverance, forensics, and a little bit of luck. Put your headphones on, keep an open mind, and let's start at the beginning. Music and in the quiet town of Ayer, Massachusetts, Katerina Rightbrow, a devoted wife and mother, led a life many would call a suburban routine. Born in 1931, she was known for her steady presence and caring nature. At 48 years old, she was a familiar face at local hangouts, such as at the Park Street Diner, where staff greeted her like an old friend. Her home was kept immaculately, her days carefully ordered, and her trust in the world reflected in one unusual habit. She kept her savings not in a bank, but tucked neatly away in the linen closet. Hers was a simple choice, rooted in an old-fashioned sense of security. But in the spring of 1980, that trust would be shattered, and her modest life would take a tragic turn. On the morning of May 21, 1980, Katerina got up like any other day. Her husband left the house around 7:10 a.m., unaware that that morning would be the last time he ever saw his wife alive. By 10:45 a.m., Katerina was found dead inside her mobile home. The scene inside was gruesome. She had been stabbed 30 times, including 5 fatal wounds to the heart. She'd also been bludgeoned with what medical examiners said was a blunt object. Sadly, the medical examiner would later conclude Katerina's death was not instantaneous and that she was alive for 10 to 20 minutes after the stabbing and was conscious for at least half of that time. There were no signs of forced entry, but Katerina's purse, jewelry, and the envelope of cash she had kept in her linen closet were missing. Inside the wastebasket, investigators recovered a paring knife, which they believed to be one of the murder weapons. Forensic teams found bloodstains, hair strands, and fingerprints scattered throughout the house, remnants of Katerina's desperate attempts at fighting back. It was immediately clear that this had been a frenzied, personal, and violent attack. The brutal nature of the crime shocked the quiet town of Ayer. In the days following the murder, police combed through Katerina's life, seeking any leads. Investigators learned that she was a frequent customer at the nearby Park Street Diner, a popular local eatery where several employees said they were aware of her habit of keeping money at home. Attention quickly turned to employee Kenneth Waters, a 27-year-old man who lived next door to Katerina with his girlfriend Brenda Marsh, who also worked at the diner. Though he had no prior criminal history, his proximity to the victim and familiarity with her habits made him a person of interest. When questioned, Kenneth provided what seemed to be a rock-solid alibi. He said he had worked at the diner until 8:30 a.m. on the morning of the murder and was driven home by a co-worker, where he then changed clothes and then went to the Ayer courthouse for a 9:01 a.m. court appearance, where he remained until after 11 a.m. From there, he said he returned to the diner and stayed until around 12:30 p.m. Police examined Kenneth for injuries or bloodstains, but found none. He was fingerprinted and interviewed, but ultimately not arrested. Still, the shadows of suspicion lingered. The case then went cold until 2 years later, in October of 1982, when a man named Robert Osborne, now living with Kenneth Waters' ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh, offered to give police information about the murder in exchange for money. The witness claimed that Brenda had told him that Kenneth had confessed to killing Katerina. At first, Brenda Marsh denied this and called the witness's statement false. However, according to later court records, police threatened to charge her as an accessory and warned her that they might take away her children as a result. Under pressure, Brenda changed her story, saying that Kenneth had returned home the morning of the murder with a long scratch on his face. Another ex-girlfriend, Rosanna Perry, was also interrogated for hours and threatened with arrest. Initially, she also said she knew nothing, but under pressure, she said that Kenneth had once made a vague statement about stabbing a woman and taking her money and jewelry. With these 2 highly coerced statements, and despite lacking physical evidence tying him to the scene, Kenneth Waters was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He went on trial in May of 1983. During the proceedings, it was revealed that the blood found at the crime scene was type O, which matched Kenneth's blood type. At the time, that was considered a significant breakthrough. However, now it is understood that blood type matches are far from conclusive. Importantly, several pieces of critical exculpatory evidence were withheld. This included fingerprint analysis from the crime scene, which excluded Kenneth and several others, and forensic analysis of hairs recovered from Katerina's hand and the knife, neither of which matched to either the victim or Kenneth. Despite the weaknesses in the prosecution's case, Kenneth Waters was convicted on May 11, 1983, and sentenced to life in prison. After his conviction, Kenneth's sister, Betty Ann Walters, made it her life's mission to prove his innocence. With no prior college education, she put herself through university and law school for the sole purpose of exonerating her brother. In 1999, she located the original blood evidence and secured a court order to preserve it for DNA testing. She then partnered with the Innocence Project. And in the year 2000, DNA analysis of the bloodstain was conducted by a private lab. The results were irrefutable. Kenneth Waters was not the source of the blood found at the crime scene. His conviction was vacated in 2001, and after nearly 18 years behind bars, he was released from prison. Sadly, just 6 months later, Kenneth died in a tragic accident. He was only 47 years old. His story and Betty Ann's unyielding devotion became the subject of the 2010 film Conviction, starring Hilary Swank. While Kenneth Waters had been officially cleared, Katerina's real killer remained unknown. For years, investigators tried to rework the case, but progress stalled until 2022. That year, the Middlesex County Cold Case Unit partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. This modern technique uses DNA evidence combined with genealogical databases in order to identify suspects through familial matches. The results pointed to a genetic lineage involving 2 deceased brothers. Investigators tracked down living relatives who agreed to provide DNA samples. Through this testing conducted by Bode Laboratories, the bloodstain found in Katerina's home was determined with overwhelming statistical certainty to have come from Joseph Leo Boudreau. Born in NIT, Massachusetts in 1943, Boudreau was a longtime Massachusetts resident who worked in Framingham. He had a criminal history, including a conviction for armed robbery in New Hampshire in 1975. Boudreau would have been 37 years old at the time of Katerina's murder. He moved to Ogunquit, Maine in 1987, 7 years after the murder, and died in 2004, a free man at the age of 61. Authorities confirmed there was no known connection between Katerina and her murderer, suggesting her killing was likely a targeted act of robbery, a heinous and unnecessary act of murder fueled by greed, possibly influenced by rumors that she kept cash in her home. While no justice could be served, the case was finally solved after 45 years, giving the family a bit of closure and signaling to other murderers yet uncaught that technology and persistence will eventually catch up to those who callously have taken the lives of others. Born around the turn of the 20th century, Louisa Dunn was a woman whose life spanned eras of extraordinary change. She lived in Easton, a working-class neighborhood of Bristol, England, and was known by neighbors as kind and sociable. Neighbors remember her standing at her front door, greeting passers-by, or simply watching the world go by. Louisa had lived through 2 world wars and was widowed twice and carried a lifetime of hardship on her noticeably small frame. Her first husband, Edwin Parker, also known as Teddy, was a respected man, a labor alderman, a trade unionist, and a city councilor. The couple was known for their shared political interests and their lively debates. Photos from the 1940s show Louisa in the background of events with her husband, always supportive, but never at the forefront of attention. One of the last photographs of the couple together captures Teddy in a wheelchair on his way to vote in the 1945 labor victory, Louisa by his side. After Teddy's death in the late 1940s, Louisa remarried. Her second husband, John Dunn, worked as a night watchman for the city. He passed away in the early 1960s, leaving Louisa once again single and lonely, despite having 2 children of her own. From her first marriage, she had 2 daughters, Iris and Edna. However, she had become estranged from both of them. Left alone and cut off from her daughters, Louisa became increasingly isolated and, in order to self-medicate, began drinking heavily, something that frequently caused further conflicts within her family. At the time of her death, neighbors said she certainly, quote, drank too much and described her as extremely vulnerable, frail, solitary, and grappling with alcoholism. Louisa was living the life that many elderly people fear. On the morning of June 28, 1967, neighbors began to worry when Louisa failed to collect her daily newspaper from the front garden wall of her home on Britannia Road. This was unusual for Louisa, a well-known and familiar face in the area who often stood at her doorway, quietly observing the street or chatting briefly with passers-by. Concerned, a neighbor climbed up to peer through her window and saw what would traumatize her for the rest of her life. Louisa was supine, motionless on the floor of her front room. Crime scene photographs showed the killer broken through the ground floor back window, rifled through drawers in the rear rooms, and ultimately encountered Louisa in the front room. She was found on her back with bruising around her neck, blood in her ear, and her underwear pulled down to her ankles. A scarf was wrapped around her neck, believed to have been used alongside a stocking to strangle her. The coroner swabbed the body and confirmed the presence of semen, indicating that she had been assaulted. At the time, forensic tools were far too limited to identify the source of the specimen. The only other forensic artifact was a partial palm print left by the section of the hand beneath the little finger. This was found on an upstairs window. The brutality of the murder shocked the community. Louisa had no means of defending herself. The press and the police called it one of the most vicious crimes in Bristol's history. What followed was one of the largest criminal investigations in Bristol's history. Headed by Chief Inspector Reg Hicks, a team of over 90 officers launched an enormous campaign to identify the killer. House-to-house inquiries were conducted for over a year. More than 8,000 homes were visited, and 19,000 palm prints were collected using old-fashioned ink rulers and brass pads. Detectives focused on every male aged 15 to 60 within a 1.5-mile radius of Louisa's home, focusing specifically on men convicted of burglary or sexual offenses, soldiers absent without leave, and the homeless. 2,000 witness statements were taken, and the investigation even expanded into Ireland and Canada. And yet, as public interest waned and media interest all but stopped, the case went cold. It wasn't until 2023 that Louisa's case was re-examined by Joanne Smith, an investigator with the Avon and Somerset Police's Major and Statutory Crime Review team. Inside the archive warehouse, Detective Smith found the original boxes from the 1967 investigation still intact, including clothing, pubic hair samples, and thousands of statements from the public. Forensic scientist Andrew Perry of Smart Forensic Services examined Louisa's skirt, carefully selecting a portion which would have been in contact with her attacker. After decades of silence, the fabric was able to give up a full DNA profile of the killer. When the sample was cross-checked against the modern criminal databases, it produced a match. Ryland Headley? Headley had had a long criminal history. In fact, in 1977, he had been arrested for a string of attacks on elderly women. That year, the town of Ipswich experienced a rash of elderly women assaults. Assaults taken place in the seniors' own homes. 2 women aged 84 and 79 were attacked by a man who broke in at night, tied them up with sheets, and threatened to kill them. One woman described waking up to find a man crawling across her bedroom floor. Within weeks of the assault, 5,000 men had been fingerprinted. Ryland Headley was among them. He was caught and pleaded guilty to both, as well as to 10 counts of burglary. He received a life sentence. However, his lawyers appealed. They claimed that they were the result of, quote, sexual frustration in his marriage, and a psychiatrist testified that the assaults were, quote, out of character. As a result of this 1977 testimony, his sentence was reduced to just 7 years. For decades, no connection was ever made to Louisa's unsolved murder. In part because no national fingerprint nor DNA database existed at the time. Amazingly, Headley had avoided giving his palm print when questioned by police in 2012, claiming he had arthritis. But when arrested in 2023, he was fingerprinted, and the print matched perfectly with the partial one recovered from Louisa's window in 1967. Detective Smith and her small team of 9 officers scrambled to gather supporting evidence, later proving Headley lived in Bristol in 1967 and tying him to the pattern of offending. Preparing the case for prosecution became a time-sensitive matter, as Headley was now 92 years old and Detective Smith and her team feared time might run out. In June of 2025, 92-year-old Ryland Headley stood trial at Bristol Crown Court for the rape and murder of Louisa Dunn in 1967. He said little during the proceedings, answering almost every question with no comment, denying her family any sense of motive for her senseless death. During the trial, the evidence was irrefutable. Between the DNA left, the palm print, the prior rape convictions with similar patterns and similar victims, and the confirmation of Headley's presence in Bristol in 1967, a jury of his peers found Headley guilty on both counts, one for rape and one for murder. On July 1, 2025, just 2 days after the 50th anniversary of Louisa's death, Headley was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years before he would be eligible for probation. During the trial, Louisa's granddaughter, Mary Danton, and her husband sat merely a few meters away from Headley. For Mary, Louisa's only surviving grandchild, the arrest and conviction of her grandmother's killer is something she says will take time to absorb. While the case was finally solved after 58 years, Mary says she is now trying to piece together more information about a grandmother she was robbed of the chance of ever knowing. Music Megan Beth Johns was born and raised in the Dallas, Texas area. Described by those close to her as always smiling and eager to help others, Megan was always willing to assist those in need. Megan's warmth and willingness to see the good in people were part of what made her so loved. However, those same characteristics may have also left her vulnerable to someone with darker intentions. At the age of 29, Megan had recently moved into her own apartment in the Las Colinas area of Irving after finally saving enough money to live independently. This was a trendy neighborhood near the Dallas-Fort Worth airport and closer to her job at Smith Barney Shears Incorporated, an investment firm where she worked as a secretary. Megan had never been married and had no children. She also had a younger half-sister, Bridget, who was only 9 years old. Despite the age gap, Megan was extremely close to her little sister, who remembers her older sister as a doting figure who made her feel deeply loved. She adored all animals and was specifically passionate about horses. She was also actively involved in helping people in need through various charities. After battling her own struggles with drug and alcohol addiction, she became sober through Narcotics Anonymous and proudly celebrated 5 years of sobriety. On the night of Tuesday, October 4, 1994, Megan spoke to her father, Don, on the phone around 9:30 p.m. The call was brief and uneventful, just the normal evening conversation between father and daughter. This would be the last time that anyone ever spoke to Megan. The following morning, on Wednesday, October 5th, when Megan failed to show up for work, her absence was immediately alarming. She was known for her punctuality, and her coworkers knew that something was wrong. By 11:30 a.m., they requested a welfare check by police at her apartment. When the apartment staff could not reach her either, a maintenance worker forced entry through the sliding glass door. Inside, he found a horrific scene. Megan was laying face down on her living room floor, still dressed in her pajamas and robe. She had been stabbed 10 times and had sustained blunt force trauma to her head and limbs. The apartment showed clear signs of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned, a small table and plant were knocked over, and slices of bread and Megan's purse were scattered together across the floor. Her cat remained in the apartment, visibly disturbed. Police quickly arrived and secured the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting Megan had let her attacker in, and that therefore it was someone she likely knew. Upstairs, blood was found on the railing of the staircase leading to Megan's bedroom. Drawers and the bathroom cabinets had been rummaged through, and a few items, but most notably a VCR and a piece of jewelry, were missing. Crime scene investigators discovered a partial palm print and blood that wasn't visible to the naked eye. Based on its height on the railing, detectives estimated that their suspect was between 5'10" and 6'1". Despite efforts to trace the missing VCR and jewelry through pawnshop records, no trace of either item was found. Police also ran the palm print through local and national databases, but no matches were found. At the time, DNA evidence had been collected, but without advanced testing or a known suspect, it yielded no results. As the years passed, Megan's family and friends refused to let her memory fade. Her father, Don Johns, was relentless in his pursuit of justice. He hired a private investigator and pushed for answers until his death in 2002, never knowing who had murdered his daughter. Megan's half-sister, Bridget, also continued to keep the case alive. In 2006, when she turned 21, Bridget walked unannounced into the Irving Police Department, determined to make sure her sister had not been forgotten. What she found was deeply moving. Sergeant Tom Rowan, who was still working the case, pulled a worn photo of Megan from his own wallet. He had carried it with him for over a decade. Bridget commented to the media, quote, "That to me said more than anything." And as she wiped tears from her eyes, she told reporters tearfully he hadn't forgotten this girl. In 2024, 30 years after Megan's death, Irving Police announced a stunning breakthrough. DNA evidence from the original crime scene had been reanalyzed using modern forensic technology. The resulting profile was entered into the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, and it finally yielded a match. The DNA found at the crime scene belonged to Daryl Patrick Goggins, who at the time of his arrest in 2024 was 61 years old. Police soon discovered that he had been a neighbor of Megan's back in 1994. On June 10, 2024, Goggins was officially charged with capital murder in Lancaster, Texas. Police confirmed that he had never been considered a suspect during the original investigation. Irving Police Chief Derek Miller opined, quote, "For 30 years, justice has been patient, but justice does not forget." Despite the DNA match and the arrest, a motive remains unclear. Police say there is currently no connection between Megan and Goggins beside their geographical proximity as neighbors. Detectives continue to attempt to uncover what led to the brutal crime. For family and friends, the identification of Megan's killer brings a measure of long-awaited peace. If you like what we do and want to see more, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much to our patrons. If you would like to support this channel, you can visit the link in our bio below. I'm the Criminologist. If this story made you think twice, tell me what detail shocked you most in the comments. Subscribe for the next case, and remember, evidence ages, but truth doesn't. Until the next file opens, stay curious, stay skeptical.